A bank teller throws black woman CEO's stack of bills on the floor, and by morning, everything changes. What should have been a routine transaction becomes the catalyst for a financial earthquake that rocks an entire industry. The disrespect shown in those fleeting seconds costs not just dignity, but $2 billion in business. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Simone Hayes pushed through the gleaming silver glass doors of Southern Heritage Bank, squinting slightly as the morning sunlight bounced off the polished marble floors. Downtown Atlanta was already buzzing with activity, but inside the bank there was a controlled hush, the reverent quiet of money-changing hands. She adjusted the sleeve of her navy suit, nothing flashy or designer-labeled, just clean lines and practical fabric. The simple flats she wore made no sound as she crossed the lobby, her leather portfolio tucked neatly under one arm. No one looked up when she entered. Why would they? At 5'4", with her natural hair pulled back in a simple twist, Simone didn't command attention through physical presence. She'd learned long ago that her power came from elsewhere, from the quiet confidence that had built Hayes Dynamics from a startup in her garage to the tech powerhouse it was today. 15 years of being underestimated had taught her patience. 15 years of walking into rooms where she was the only black woman had taught her how to move through spaces that weren't designed with her in mind. The bank lobby hummed with the white noise of commerce, the soft clacking of keyboards, the murmured conversations, the occasional chime of a computer alert. Simone took her place in line, mentally reviewing the day ahead. The merger paperwork for Hayes Dynamics would be finalized tomorrow, $2 billion changing hands, the culmination of years of work. But today's errand was personal, a simple transaction that should take minutes. She shifted her weight from one foot to another, her mind already racing ahead to her afternoon meetings, unaware that this routine bank visit was about to become anything but ordinary. When Simone stepped up to the counter, Lauren Miller's practiced customer service smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Lauren was 24, had been working at First Capital Bank for just over 3 years, and prided herself on her ability to spot trouble. She adjusted her crisp navy blazer and tucked a strand of blonde hair behind her ear as she examined Simone's withdrawal slip. $20,000 in cash. Lauren's voice carried a hint of disbelief that made several customers in line glance up. That's quite a large sum to be carrying around. Her perfectly manicured fingers tapped against the counter as she waited for an explanation, though Simone wasn't obligated to provide one. Simone placed her driver's license and bank card on the counter with practiced calm. Yes, 20,000. I'm aware of the amount, she replied evenly, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that had become second nature through years of business negotiations. She'd made similar withdrawals before at other branches without issue, but something about Lauren's demeanor suggested this wouldn't be so simple. Lauren picked up Simone's ID between 2 fingers, studying it with narrowed eyes as if searching for signs of forgery. "And the purpose of this withdrawal?" she asked, though bank policy didn't require customers to disclose their reasons for accessing their own funds. "Personal business," Simone answered, maintaining her composure despite the growing awareness that other customers were watching this exchange. She'd experienced this type of scrutiny before, the subtle questioning that her white colleagues rarely seemed to encounter. Lauren's lips pressed into a thin line as she turned to her computer terminal, typing with deliberate slowness. "I'll need to verify your account information," she said, though Simone had already provided all necessary identification. "We have protocols for unusual transactions." The word unusual hung in the air between them. Simone took a steady breath, keeping her expression neutral despite the familiar burn of indignation rising in her chest. As CEO of Horizon Innovations, she regularly handled multi-million-dollar deals, yet here she stood, being treated with thinly veiled suspicion over accessing her own money. "Take your time," Simone said calmly. Though she was acutely aware of the growing line behind her, she noticed an older white man being served by another teller, withdrawing what appeared to be a similar amount with nothing more than a friendly chat and quick service. The contrast wasn't lost on her, but she'd learned long ago that pointing it out rarely improved the situation. The bills fluttered to the floor like autumn leaves, scattering at Simone's feet. For a moment, the entire bank lobby seemed to freeze in time. All eyes locked on the spectacle. Lauren's hand was still extended over the counter, her fingers splayed where they had just accidentally pushed the stack of cash. The silence lasted only seconds before a muffled laugh broke through from the adjacent teller window, followed by whispers that seemed to fill the space with a toxic haze. Simone felt her chest tighten. But years of navigating corporate America had taught her to wear composure like armor. Without a word, she knelt down, her designer suit touching the cold marble floor as she methodically collected each bill. One by one, she gathered them, aware of the 23 pairs of eyes watching her every move. Some gazes held pity, others amusement, but most just uncomfortable curiosity. The sound of her own heartbeat thundered in her ears, but her hands remained steady, betraying none of the rage building inside her. When she finally stood, the last bill secured between her fingers, Simone met Lauren's gaze directly. The teller's expression flickered between defiance and something that might have been shame. "Thank you for your assistance today," Simone said, her voice carrying across the now silent lobby with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. She tucked the disorganized bills into her purse with deliberate care, adjusted her jacket, and walked toward the exit with measured steps. Her heels clicked against the marble floor like a metronome, counting down to something the bank had no way of anticipating. As the glass doors swung shut behind her, Simone finally allowed herself to exhale, the mask of professional detachment momentarily slipping to reveal the storm beneath. This wasn't just about money on a floor. This was about dignity, respect, and power. And Simone Evans had not built a financial empire by letting such moments pass without consequence. Simone sat in her sleek black Tesla, hands gripping the steering wheel a bit too tightly as she tried to steady her breathing. The air conditioning hummed quietly while she replayed the humiliating scene in her mind. Her cash scattered across the floor, the teller's dismissive glance, the stares from other customers, 20 years of building her company, and she still had to deal with this. Her phone chimed with a notification. Marcus, her executive assistant of 8 years, had texted, "Acquisition papers ready for 2 p.m. Need anything else?" She took another deep breath before typing back, careful to keep her tone professional despite the storm brewing inside her. All good. Helping the Mitchell family this morning. No need to burden Marcus with what had just happened. The Mitchell family's foundation was one of her passion projects, providing interest-free loans to black entrepreneurs who'd been denied traditional banking services. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, worth 9 figures personally, about to acquire a tech company valued at over $2 billion. Yet she'd just been treated like a suspicious character at a neighborhood bank. Simone checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, adjusting her blazer and smoothing her hair. The face that looked back at her was composed, determined, the same expression she'd worn through countless boardroom battles and negotiation tables. Her thoughts drifted to her father's words from years ago. "They'll judge you twice, once for being black, once for being a woman. So you've got to be twice as good, twice as prepared." She'd lived by that advice, building her empire methodically, never showing weakness. Simone picked up her phone again, scrolling to find the bank's corporate information. She wouldn't let this incident derail her day or the acquisition. That would be giving someone else power over her schedule, her emotions, her business. But she wouldn't forget it either. The bank executives should know exactly what happened in their branch today, not as revenge, but as accountability. With newfound resolve, she started the car. She had the Mitchell family to help, and then a company to acquire. The morning's unpleasantness would be addressed, but on her terms, in her time. What the bank staff didn't realize, what Diane had so callously dismissed, was that the $20,000 wasn't some frivolous withdrawal. Simone had spent the morning in a difficult conversation with Marcus about the Mitchell family. The Mitchells had been part of the Hayes Dynamics family for over a decade. Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell worked as part of the custodial team, arriving each night to clean the offices while everyone else went home. Their dedication had never wavered, not once in all those years. But 3 days ago, Mr. Mitchell Sr., the family patriarch and grandfather who lived with them, had passed away suddenly from a heart attack. They're drowning in medical bills and funeral costs, Marcus had explained during their morning briefing. And with 3 kids to feed, he hadn't needed to finish the sentence. Simone immediately understood what needed to be done. The $20,000 would cover the funeral expenses and keep the family afloat for a few months while they grieved. No loans, no strings attached, just support for loyal employees when they needed it most. This was the kind of decision that never made it into business school case studies or quarterly reports. But to Simone, it represented everything she had built her company to be. Back at Hayes Dynamics headquarters, Simone handed the envelope to Marcus in the privacy of her office. The weight of the cash felt significant between them, a tangible manifestation of care. "Give this to the Mitchells," she said quietly. "Personally, please. And make sure they understand it's not alone, it's family taking care of family." Marcus nodded, studying her face. "I will. Are you okay? You seem—" "I'm fine," she replied, though they both knew it wasn't true. The composed exterior she maintained betrayed nothing of the storm raging beneath. The humiliation at Pinnacle wasn't just about her, it was about every person who'd ever been judged before being known, every assumption made based on appearance rather than substance. Marcus hesitated at the door. "The Goldstein meeting is in 30 minutes. Do you need more time?" Simone straightened her shoulders, her professional mask sliding back into place. "No. I'll be ready." The business of running a $2 billion company wouldn't wait, even if her thoughts were elsewhere. But as Marcus left with the envelope, she knew that this gesture, not the headlines or boardroom negotiations, was what truly mattered. By noon, the financial world was buzzing with speculation about the Hayes-Reynolds merger. The story had leaked faster than anyone anticipated, and trading floors across the city hummed with excited chatter. Analysts were already predicting how the $2 billion partnership would reshape the logistics industry. Phone lines at both companies were jammed with calls from investors and reporters hungry for confirmation. At Reynolds Logistics headquarters, however, board member David Langford sat alone in his office, a cold cup of coffee untouched on his desk. Unlike his colleagues who were celebrating what promised to be their most profitable quarter in company history, David couldn't shake the disturbing scene he'd witnessed that morning at First Capital Bank. He'd been waiting to speak with his personal banker when he noticed a well-dressed black woman being treated with shocking disrespect by one of the tellers. At the time, he hadn't recognized her from behind, but as financial news alerts flooded his phone about Simone Hayes, CEO of Hayes Innovation, the pieces suddenly clicked into place. The woman whose cash deposit had been scattered across the floor was the same executive they were about to enter into a historic partnership with. David ran his hands through his silver hair, guilt gnawing at his conscience. He should have said something, done something. Instead, he'd simply watched, uncomfortable but silent, as the scene unfolded. Now, knowing who she was, not that it should matter, made his inaction feel even worse. He picked up his phone and composed a text to Simone's executive assistant. "Ms. Hayes, this is David Langford from Reynolds. I need to speak with you privately before tomorrow's signing. It's a matter of some urgency and personal importance." He hesitated before hitting send, wondering if he was overstepping. The merger documents were already being finalized. Was he risking the deal by bringing up what happened? But his conscience wouldn't let him stay silent. He pressed send and waited, wondering if she would even agree to meet with him, and what exactly he planned to say if she did. The atmosphere in Southern Heritage Bank had shifted since the morning's incident. But Lauren remained oblivious, smugly recounting her confrontation to co-workers who exchanged uncomfortable glances. She felt vindicated, certain she'd exposed someone trying to play above their station. When her desk phone rang and Greg Townsend, the branch manager, requested her immediate presence in his office, she assumed it was for praise. Lauren even straightened her blazer before walking in, a self-satisfied smile playing at her lips. Greg sat behind his desk, his normally relaxed demeanor replaced with a tense, drawn expression. He didn't invite her to sit down. "Do you have any idea who that was?" he demanded, voice low and urgent, fingers pressed against his temple. Lauren shrugged dismissively. Just someone trying to look important. You know how they come in here sometimes, acting like they own the place." She chuckled, expecting Greg to join in. Instead, his jaw tightened visibly. "That was Simone Hayes," he said, each word deliberate and heavy. "The Simone Hayes, CEO of Hayes Innovations, board member of 3 Fortune 500 companies, one of the most influential businesswomen in the country." The color drained from Lauren's face as recognition dawned. She'd seen that name in business magazines, on financial news segments, even featured in the bank's own quarterly investor report. But she didn't. She wasn't dressed like... Lauren stammered, her excuses evaporating before she could form them. "Not everyone with money flaunts it," Greg cut in sharply, "and not everyone who looks a certain way should be treated differently." He leaned forward. "Do you understand the position you've put us in?" Panic flickered in Lauren's eyes as she finally grasped the gravity of her mistake. Her mind raced through the morning's interaction, every dismissive glance, every condescending word, every assumption she'd made based solely on appearance. The memory of those bills scattered across the floor now felt like evidence in a case against her. "I didn't know," she whispered, but even to her own ears, it sounded hollow. Rosa Delgado's fingers trembled slightly as she slipped the flash drive into her purse. As a junior teller at First Capital for just 8 months, she knew she was risking everything, but the knot in her stomach wouldn't let her ignore what she'd witnessed. The security footage she'd downloaded showed the entire incident in painful clarity. Greg's dismissive treatment of Simone, Lauren's hasty attempt to smooth things over, and the unmistakable look of humiliation on Simone's face. Rosa had watched silently from her station, the familiar burn of injustice rising in her chest. This wasn't the first time she'd seen customers treated differently based on appearances, but it was certainly the most blatant. During her lunch break, Rosa sat alone in her car, staring at her phone. Marcus Washington's contact information was pulled up on the screen. Simone's executive assistant had visited the branch several times to handle smaller transactions and had always greeted Rosa by name, asking about her progress in night school. Unlike most of the executives who barely acknowledged her existence, Marcus treated her like a person. Taking a deep breath, she composed a text. "Hi, Marcus. This is Rosa from First Capital. I have something important regarding yesterday's incident with Mrs. Jefferson. Can we speak privately?" She hesitated for a full minute before pressing send, her future at the bank hanging in the balance. The response came almost immediately. "I remember you, Rosa. Mrs. Jefferson was deeply upset by what happened. Can you meet after your shift today?" Rosa confirmed the meeting, her heart racing. She knew Lauren had already submitted an incident report that downplayed what happened, painting it as a simple misunderstanding. The security footage told a different story, one of clear bias and disrespect toward a woman whose company could transform the bank's future. As her lunch break ended, Rosa returned to her station, avoiding eye contact with Greg, who was laughing with another manager near the break room. She'd made her decision. Whatever consequences came, she couldn't be part of a system that protected people like him while humiliating someone like Simone Jefferson. Simone glanced at her watch as her assistant, Marcus, slipped a folded note across her desk. She opened it and felt her heart skip a beat. David Langford wants to speak privately. Seems urgent. Her fingers tightened slightly on the paper before she carefully folded it and placed it in her pocket. The Reynolds board meeting was in 45 minutes, and she had been meticulously preparing her presentation all afternoon. The partnership was too important to leave anything to chance, especially after this morning's humiliating incident at the bank. "Tell him I can spare 10 minutes before the board meeting," she told Marcus, keeping her voice neutral despite the storm of emotions churning inside her. As she gathered her materials, Simone caught her reflection in the glass wall of her office. She looked immaculate in her tailored navy suit, not a hint of the morning's distress visible on her face. She had spent years perfecting this mask of composure, this armor that protected her in spaces where people like that bank teller still saw her as something less. When she entered the small conference room where David waited, she noticed immediately how uncomfortable he looked. His usual confident demeanor was replaced by something she rarely saw in men of his position: genuine contrition. He stood awkwardly as she entered, his hands fidgeting with his tie. "Simone, thank you for making time," he began, his voice lower than usual. "I need to say something about what happened this morning." She tilted her head slightly. "You were at the bank." David nodded, color rising to his face. "I was in line behind you. I saw everything that teller did." He paused, swallowing hard. "And I did nothing. I just watched." Simone studied him, her expression deliberately unreadable. The silence stretched between them, filling the room with unspoken words. "I should have spoken up," he continued, the words tumbling out faster now. "It was wrong what she did to you. And I just stood there. I've been thinking about it all day. And I'm truly sorry." Simone took a measured breath before responding. "Sometimes silence is the loudest statement." "David," she said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of 1,000 similar moments. "It tells me exactly where I stand." David flinched slightly at her words, recognition dawning in his eyes. For perhaps the first time, he was seeing a glimpse of what it meant to walk through the world in her shoes. David shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his fingers tapping nervously against his coffee mug. After a long pause, he finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "There's something you should know, Simone. 3 of our board members, Patterson, Whitfield and Jameson, they sit on Southern Heritage Bank's advisory panel, have for years." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "The connections between our companies run much deeper than what's on paper." Simone felt the air leave her lungs. This wasn't just about one racist teller or even one prejudiced branch manager. The rot went all the way to the top, threading through both organizations like a cancer. "So when I speak out about what happened," she said slowly, piecing it together, "I'm not just embarrassing some local branch. I'm potentially humiliating people who help run Reynolds." David nodded grimly. "If you walk away from this deal, it'll shake both companies to the core. We're talking about relationships that have been cultivated for decades. The financial press will have a field day speculating about why the partnership collapsed at the 11th hour." Simone stared out the window at the Atlanta skyline, the buildings gleaming in the afternoon sun. Everything she'd worked for, the years of sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the doubters she'd proven wrong, had led to this moment. A $2 billion partnership that would cement her legacy and transform her company. "You know what's funny, David?" she said, turning back to him. "I've spent my entire career being told to be strategic, to pick my battles, to not let emotion cloud my judgment." She let out a humorless laugh. "But at what point does strategic become another word for complicit?" David leaned forward. "I understand you're upset." "No. Simone cut him off, her voice firm but controlled. Respect isn't a perk or a bonus, it's non-negotiable. If this partnership is built on silence and compromise of my basic dignity, maybe it shouldn't exist at all. The weight of her words hung between them. David gathered his papers slowly, recognizing the meeting had reached its conclusion. "I hope you'll reconsider," he said, standing to leave. "There's still time to salvage this." As the door closed behind him, Simone remained seated, the threat of $1 billion fallout hanging in the air like a storm about to break. She picked up her phone, scrolling to her CFO's number. Whatever came next, she needed to be prepared. That evening, Rosa sat at a corner table in the dimly lit cafe, nervously checking her watch every few minutes. The place buzzed with after-work patrons, providing just enough background noise to mask their conversation. When Marcus finally walked through the door, she felt her heart racing. He spotted her immediately, giving a subtle nod before making his way over. "Thank you for meeting me," Rosa said, her voice barely above a whisper. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small flash drive, holding it tightly for a moment before sliding it across the table. "Everything's on here. The unedited security footage, the manager's emails about handling the situation, even the internal memo instructing us to flag certain customers." Her hands trembled visibly as she released the drive. "I can't keep quiet anymore. People need to see what really happened." Marcus pocketed the flash drive carefully. "You're doing the right thing," he assured her, keeping his voice low. "Simone will handle everything with discretion. She understands the sensitivity of this situation." Rosa glanced around nervously. "What if they figure out it was me? I could lose everything, my job, my reputation." "We'll protect your identity," Marcus promised, reaching across to briefly squeeze her hand. "This kind of courage shouldn't come with punishment." As Marcus stood to leave, he added, "You're not alone in this. Remember that." He paid for both their coffees and headed toward the exit, the weight of the flash drive heavy in his pocket. Rosa remained seated, watching him disappear into the evening crowd. A complex mixture of emotions washed over her: relief that she'd finally taken action, pride in standing up for what was right, and undeniable dread about what might come next. She'd just risked her entire future for a shot at justice. Whether that gamble would pay off remained to be seen, but for the first time in weeks she felt like she could breathe again. The truth was finally going to come out, whatever the consequences might be. Simone sat alone in her dimly lit office, the blue glow of her monitor reflecting off her face as she watched the security footage for the third time. Each viewing made her blood boil more intensely. There it was, plain as day. Lauren deliberately tossing her stack of bills onto the floor, the smirk barely concealed as she pretended it was an accident. The camera angle from behind the counter captured everything, including Lauren's sideways glance at her colleague before the mishap. But what truly confirmed Simone's suspicions was the footage from 2 hours later. Greg, the branch manager, personally accessing the security system, flagging the specific time frame of her visit, and initiating a deletion command. "Unbelievable," she whispered, pausing the frame where Greg's finger hovered over the delete button. The timestamp matched exactly when she'd received that suspiciously prompt apology call. They hadn't just humiliated her, they'd tried to cover it up once they realized who she was. Simone picked up her phone and texted Marcus. "My office. Now." She sat back in her leather chair, mind racing through the implications. Wilcox Financial had been their primary banking partner for 15 years, $2 billion in annual transactions, countless joint ventures, all about to change because one teller couldn't see past her prejudice and a manager thought he could erase evidence rather than address the real problem. 3 sharp knocks preceded Marcus's entrance. Her CFO's expression was concerned as he closed the door behind him. "You saw it?" he asked, nodding toward the screen. "Every frame," Simone replied, turning her monitor so he could see. "Watch." Marcus leaned forward, his expression darkening as the scene unfolded. When it finished, he straightened up, adjusting his tie, a nervous habit she recognized from board meetings before difficult decisions. "What do you want to do?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. Simone's voice was calm but resolute, prepared to move all our corporate accounts, every cent, quietly. She emphasized the last word. "I don't want them to see it coming. Line up meetings with the 3 banks we shortlisted last year during our contingency planning." Marcus nodded, already pulling out his tablet to make notes. "This will cause quite the stir in the financial district. Wilcox won't take this lying down. They should have thought about that before they decided I wasn't worth basic respect," Simone replied, closing the video file. "And Marcus, make sure our legal team reviews all contracts for exit clauses. I want this transition to be seamless, but I also want it to hurt." "Understood." Marcus paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry this happened to you." "Don't be sorry," Simone said, turning to look out at the city skyline. "Just be thorough." Simone arrived at Southern Heritage Bank promptly at 9 the next morning, flanked by 3 impeccably dressed attorneys from her legal team. The bank's security guard, who had barely acknowledged her presence yesterday, now scrambled to hold the door. Word traveled fast in banking circles, and by now everyone knew exactly who Simone Hayes was. The lobby fell silent as she walked in, her heels clicking purposefully against the marble floor. Greg emerged from his office before she could even approach the reception desk, his face a mask of professional courtesy that couldn't quite hide his distress. "Ms. Hayes, good morning. I've prepared the conference room for our meeting," he said. Extending his hand, she noted how it trembled slightly as they shook. Behind his forced smile, panic danced in his eyes. "Let's not waste time," Simone replied coolly, following him to the conference room, where her attorneys began laying out documents across the polished table. The paperwork was comprehensive: authorization forms for the closure of every single Hayes Dynamics account, transfer instructions for over $80 million in assets, and termination notices for all business relationships with Southern Heritage Bank. Through the glass walls, Simone could see Lauren standing at her station, now wearing the distinctive blazer of a senior teller, a promotion that had clearly come too late. The young woman's face drained of color as she watched the proceedings. The smugness from yesterday completely evaporated. When their eyes met briefly across the lobby, Lauren quickly looked away, her hands fidgeting nervously with papers at her station. "Is there anything we can do to reconsider this decision?" Greg asked desperately, after her lead attorney explained the full scope of their withdrawal. "Perhaps a personal apology from our staff. We value Hayes Dynamics business tremendously." Simone signed the final document with a flourish and stood up. As she gathered her belongings, she paused at the door, looking directly at Lauren, who had edged closer, ostensibly to deliver something to a nearby desk. "Respect costs nothing," Simone said, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "But the lack of it just cost you everything." With that, she walked out, leaving behind a bank that had just lost its most valuable client, and any chance at the $2 billion partnership that could have transformed their future. The fallout came swiftly. By midday, Southern Heritage Bank's stock had plunged 17% as word spread about TechVision's massive withdrawal. Trading volume exploded to 10 times normal levels, with institutional investors scrambling to limit their exposure. The bank's communication team issued a vague statement about temporary liquidity adjustments, but Wall Street analysts weren't buying it. Something catastrophic must have happened to trigger a $2 billion relationship termination, commented Melissa Winters on CNBC's Power Lunch. Banks don't lose flagship clients overnight without serious cause. Financial reporters descended on Southern Heritage's headquarters like vultures. Camera crews positioned themselves at every entrance, hoping to catch executives for comment. Inside, Emergency board meetings convened as executives tried desperately to contain the damage. Meanwhile, Rosa had uploaded the security footage to a newly created anonymous account. She added no commentary, just the raw video showing her treatment, with faces slightly blurred to comply with platform guidelines. The caption simply read, "How a CEO with billions to invest was treated at Southern Heritage Bank. Marja, respect costs nothing." The hashtag caught fire. Within hours, it had been shared over 50,000 times. Comments flooded in from people sharing similar experiences of being judged by their appearance in financial institutions. Black business owners particularly resonated with Rosa's experience, many recounting nearly identical situations. "This is why I drive my nicest car to investor meetings," wrote one entrepreneur with over 1 million followers. "The system forces us to perform wealth before we're taken seriously." By evening, mainstream news outlets had picked up the story. While Rosa's identity remained officially undisclosed, speculation ran rampant. The video had been viewed over 3 million times, with celebrities and influencers amplifying its reach. Southern Heritage's PR nightmare intensified when past complaints about discriminatory treatment began resurfacing. Former employees came forward with accounts of an institutional culture that encouraged profiling certain customers. One whistleblower claimed tellers received informal training to scrutinize transactions from non-traditional-looking clients. What had begun as one woman's humiliating experience was rapidly evolving into a national conversation about respect, dignity, and the invisible barriers faced by minority business leaders. And somewhere in her office, watching the chaos unfold from her phone, Rosa felt a complex mixture of vindication and sadness that such lessons still needed teaching in modern America. David sat in his office at Reynolds Logistics, staring at the chairman's dismissive email. Thomas Wells had called the entire situation a private embarrassment that would blow over soon enough. David ran his hands through his hair in frustration. How could they not see what was happening? His phone buzzed with another notification. 3 more clients had emailed requesting immediate meetings to discuss their relationship with Oakmont Financial. The scandal was spreading faster than anyone at the bank seemed willing to acknowledge. He'd just gotten off a call with Westridge Manufacturing, a 30-year client who had plainly stated they were transferring their 9-figure accounts by the end of the week. "They're afraid of the association," David muttered to himself, scrolling through the growing list of clients planning their exit. These weren't just small accounts. These were cornerstone relationships that had taken decades to build. The damage was spreading exponentially, yet the executive floor remained in denial. David opened a blank document on his computer and began typing his resignation letter. 15 years at Reynolds Logistics, and this was how it would end. As he wrote, his thoughts kept returning to Amara's face that day in the bank, the dignity she'd maintained even as her money was scattered across the floor like trash. He thought about how quickly Oakmont had circled the wagons around Jessica, rather than addressing the real issue. After finalizing his resignation, David made one more decision. He reached for his phone and called Maya Winters, a journalist he'd known since college who covered the financial sector for a respected news outlet. "Maya, I have something you need to hear," he said quietly, "but I need your word. This stays anonymous until my resignation is processed tomorrow." "You have it," she replied. "What's going on?" For the next 20 minutes, David detailed everything. The incident at the bank, Amara's company, the partnership that had been lost, and most importantly, the systemic dismissal of the concerns by both Oakmont and Reynolds. By morning, the story was everywhere. David's phone wouldn't stop ringing as he cleaned out his desk. The headline on Maya's article said it all: "Banking giant loses billions after racial profiling incident. Insider reveals pattern of institutional denial." Simone couldn't dwell on the past. The incident at First Capital had been a painful reminder of the prejudice that still existed. but she refused to let it define her next chapter. As she settled into her office at Hayes Dynamics headquarters, she reviewed the personnel files on her desk. One name stood out: Rosa Delgado, the bank teller who had risked everything to speak the truth. "Send Ms. Delgado in, please," Simone instructed her assistant through the intercom. When Rosa entered the office, she looked nervous, clutching her purse tightly. The young woman had been through a whirlwind since the incident. Terminated from First Capital for violating confidentiality, then suddenly receiving a call from Hayes Dynamics. "Please, sit down." Simone gestured to the chair across from her desk. "I've been reviewing your background. Before banking, you were studying financial analysis." Rosa nodded. "I had to pause my education when my mother got sick. The bank job was supposed to be temporary." Simone smiled. "And life rarely goes according to plan, but sometimes the detours lead us exactly where we need to be." She slid a folder across the desk. "I'd like to offer you a position as a junior financial analyst here at Hayes Dynamics." Rosa's eyes widened. "But I don't have my degree completed." "You have something more valuable," Simone interrupted. "Integrity is what matters. You stood up for what's right when others would have stayed silent." "That's the kind of character I want on my team." Tears welled in Rosa's eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll finish your degree while working here. We'll adjust your schedule accordingly." Rosa straightened her shoulders. "I won't let you down, Ms. Hayes. I promise I'll prove myself worthy of this chance." Simone shook her head. "You already have. The moment you decided to tell the truth, you proved exactly who you are." As Rosa left the office, Simone watched through the glass walls as the young woman was shown to her new workspace. For the first time in years, Rosa walked with her head held high, no longer invisible. Simone recognized that look, the look of someone who finally felt seen for who they truly were, not what others assumed them to be. Southern Heritage Bank was in full crisis mode. Executives huddled in emergency meetings as their stock price plummeted. By midday, Greg Harmon had been escorted from the building, his resignation letter hastily drafted by corporate attorneys. The bank's PR team worked around the clock, but the damage control efforts were failing spectacularly. Lauren, rather than staying silent as advised, had doubled down on social media, posting a tearful video claiming she was being unfairly targeted and a victim of cancel culture gone mad. The comments section became a battleground, with thousands calling out her privilege and tone-deaf response. "I've worked in banking for 15 years, she wrote in one particularly ill-advised post. "I've never seen color, only customers." This statement triggered another wave of backlash, with many pointing out that not seeing color was precisely part of the problem. Her attempts to defend herself only revealed a profound lack of understanding about systemic discrimination. Meanwhile, Southern Heritage's newly appointed interim CEO, Thomas Blackwell, held a press conference announcing Greg's departure and Lauren's indefinite suspension. "What happened to Ms. Washington is inexcusable and reflects a failure at every level of our organization," he stated solemnly. "We are implementing immediate changes, including mandatory bias training, a diverse hiring initiative, and a complete overhaul of our customer service protocols." But these promises rang hollow to many. The hashtag #PashaBankingWhileBlack continued trending, with hundreds sharing similar experiences at financial institutions across the country. Regulators from 3 different federal agencies announced formal investigations into Southern Heritage's practices, requesting years of internal communications and customer complaint records. The exodus of corporate clients continued unabated. By week's end, 5 more Fortune 500 companies had pulled their accounts. Regional businesses, particularly those with diverse ownership, were departing in droves. Southern Heritage's reputation, built over 120 years, was crumbling in real time. Thomas spent hours on the phone with major shareholders, trying to convince them that the bank could weather this storm. But in private board meetings, the discussions had already turned to potential merger options and asset sales. What had begun as one terrible interaction with a powerful customer had exposed deep-rooted problems that could no longer be ignored or explained away. Simone's principled stand reverberated far beyond her own company. Within days, her phone began lighting up with texts and calls from fellow CEOs and business leaders. "Did you really pull $2 billion?" asked Marissa, who ran a tech startup. "Because I'm thinking about moving our accounts too." It wasn't just talk. A quiet revolution began sweeping through the financial world. 3 major corporations transferred their banking relationships within the first week. By the end of the month, 7 more had followed suit. None explicitly cited Simone's situation, but the timing was impossible to ignore. One banking executive was overheard at a conference muttering, "It's like watching dominoes fall." The message was unmistakable. Respect wasn't just a social nicety anymore. It had become a bottom-line issue. Corporations were increasingly willing to vote with their dollars when it came to how their executives and employees were treated. Industry analysts estimated that within 3 months, nearly $4 billion in banking relationships had shifted. Simone herself maintained a dignified silence throughout. When reporters called requesting interviews, her assistant politely declined. "Miss Williams has no further comment on the matter," became the standard response. She understood that sometimes the most powerful statement was letting your actions speak for themselves. The impact on her own company was substantial. Their stock price climbed 11% in the quarter following the incident. Market analysts attributed this partly to the partnership with First Capital, but also to something less tangible: public trust. Social media posts praising Simone's leadership continued circulating months after the incident. Perhaps the most unexpected outcome was the flood of applications to work at Williams Enterprises. Young professionals, particularly women of color, cited Simone as their inspiration. "I want to work somewhere with leadership that stands up for what's right," became a common refrain in cover letters. One morning, as Simone reviewed the quarterly numbers with her team, her chief financial officer smiled. "You know what's not on these spreadsheets?" she asked. "The goodwill we've built. That's worth more than any partnership." Simone nodded. She hadn't set out to create a movement or become a symbol. She'd simply refused to accept disrespect. But sometimes that's exactly how change begins, with one person drawing a line and saying, "Enough." 1 week later, Simone was sorting through her morning mail when she noticed a cream-colored envelope with handwritten addressing. Unlike the formal business correspondence that usually filled her inbox, this one had a personal touch that made her pause. She carefully opened it and unfolded a simple note card inside. The handwriting was neat, but slightly shaky. "Mrs. Mitchell's," she guessed. "Thank you for your kindness and for fighting for what's right." It read, "You changed our lives in more ways than you know." The note went on to explain that Gerald had started his new position at the community center and that for the first time in years they felt hopeful about their future. Simone felt a warmth spread through her chest as she read the words again. She walked across her office to the credenza, where her mother's photograph stood in a silver frame. It was her favorite picture, her mother standing proud in front of the small beauty salon she'd owned, the first black-owned business on that street. Simone carefully propped the Mitchells' letter against the frame. Her mother had always taught her that true success wasn't measured by money, but by maintaining your dignity and helping others preserve theirs. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of media attention and industry buzz. Competitors had been calling non-stop, eager to fill the gap left by First National. Her company's stock had actually risen 5% after news broke of her decision to terminate the partnership. But sitting here now, looking at her mother's face and the Mitchells' gratitude, Simone understood with perfect clarity that the victory that mattered most wasn't financial. It was about standing firm in her principles, even when it would have been easier to look away. It was about recognizing that her position gave her power not just to build wealth, but to build a more just world. She gently touched the frame, thinking how proud her mother would be, not of the billions she managed, but of the dignity she'd preserved, both her own and others. And in the end, that was the legacy that truly mattered. Simone watched the live stream from her office, a smile playing on her lips as Rosa took the stage to accept the National Business Leadership Award. The auditorium erupted in thunderous applause. 6 months had passed since that fateful day at First Capital Bank, and the ripples of change had grown into waves. "I'm here on behalf of Simone Jenkins," Rosa began, her voice steady and clear. "She asked me to share these words. The true heroes are those who speak up when it matters most. Not always the loudest voices, but the most persistent ones." The camera panned across the audience, capturing the faces of industry titans who had partnered with Simone's foundation to create new diversity standards across the banking sector. Somewhere in that crowd sat Marcus, now heading his own consulting firm, specializing in institutional culture change. Even Charles had reached out last month, humbled by his journey of self-reflection after being let go from First Capital. Simone closed her laptop as the speech ended. Her phone immediately lit up with congratulatory messages, but she set it aside. Through her office window, she could see the skyline of the city where she'd built her empire. The same city where she'd once been made to feel small. The $2 billion partnership with Global Finance had been just the beginning. 3 more major deals had followed, each with companies committed to her new accountability standards. She thought about Davidson sometimes. Last she heard, he was working at a small credit union in another state. The Banking Commission's investigation had been thorough, resulting in mandatory training programs across the industry. Picking up a framed photo from her desk, a picture of her grandmother who taught her to stand tall, Simone felt a profound sense of peace. She hadn't needed to shout or shame. Her quiet resolve had accomplished what anger never could. The movement she'd sparked wasn't built on public outrage, but on something far more powerful, the unshakable dignity of knowing your worth and refusing to accept anything less. As twilight settled over the city, Simone knew that somewhere another woman was walking into a bank, head held high, carrying her grandmother's wisdom and Simone's legacy. The knowledge that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to be diminished.